All right, we are back. I'm gonna start my timer. I'm gonna try to keep them to about 15-minute videos. It's easier for upload. Got a new mic, so hopefully that sounds even better than the previous one. We will see. So we left off chapter 30. We left off topic 14, talking about the literature review. So when you structure the literature review, you're going to want to do a few things. Remember, you're trying to provide a summary of that piece of literature in a way that connects it to your literature. And so when you look at a literature review as part of a larger work, as an article or a book, they typically are about 20% of the total. So the entire literature review is. So any given article will be a much shorter. Literature reviews often begin an article or the next item after the introduction. So you might introduce your topic and then do a literature review. So how do you start a literature review? A lot of times you'll talk about a compelling statistic. You might talk, so for example, I'm going to go back, can use that a lot in my research, but you're studying sexual assault. You might talk about the incidence of sexual assaults on college campuses if that's what you're studying. You might define the key terms. You might find a trend of information about the statistics. Is it increasing or is it decreasing? And then you want to kind of look at and ensure you know the meaning and the details of how the compelling key that key information was collected. So you want to make sure you understand that. You might mix together using precise words with the definitions of key terms. Try not to use those dictionary definitions. So you don't want to say, according to Webster, blah, 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 blah. Rather, you want to draw from the literature and how they refer to that information. And then once combined, you kind of finish with optional trend information that supports the importance of this process. So kind of goes back and forth on both of them. And so that's kind of the structure of a literature review. I'll let you guys read the rest of that in the textbook. But so how do you connect the literature review to your study? You're going to kind of jump back and forth overall, essentially, between two different tasks. You're going to outline topics the literature review should include. So you're going to say, hey, this is what I should include in this part of this research. Then you're going to scrutinize elements of research questions and the research plan. So you're going to kind of go back and forth. You're going to outline, and then you're going to scrutinize. Then from the scrutinize, you're going to outline. And you're going to probably jump back and forth between these. You're going to think through what the reader needs to know about your research topic in order to fully grasp its research and its findings. So if you're saying, this is my logic, this is what I think we should study and how we should study it, then you're providing that logic as part of your literature review. Okay. As you build a literature review outline, you can add some headings in more detail. You can split things up. So a lot of times I'll talk about, within the sexual assault stuff, I'll talk about rape miss, and I'll talk about expectancies, and I'll talk about jury research. So those are each different components, all looking at the same basic idea. Good literature reviews tend to have themes. They summarize the findings by themes or variable relationships. They don't just go over every single study. Rather, they summarize by theme. So like I said, the theme of, rape miss, what kind of research and how does that affect it? They do not typically cover one article at a time. They'll say research has found this concept, and they'll have more than one piece of literature to support that. It links the research and findings to the current project. So research has demonstrated that this happens, and this is important for my study because. And then it succinctly describes the methods and findings of the article. Remember, you're trying to hit the three. It's almost like you're writing your version of an abstract for the article as it relates to your topic. And so you want to be succinct. You want to talk about their methods, at least the ones that are relevant to your research. You want to talk about the measures. And then you want to talk briefly about the findings. And again, we're talking very brief. We're not talking about outlining every single detail, because if they want to, they can go back to the literature and look at it themselves. Okay, so when you're preparing to write this critical review, there's two common mistakes. Novices kind of treat the results of each study as facts instead of as scrutinizing them for flaws or weaknesses. So when you look at a literature review and you look at someone else's research article, you have to realize that this is their perspective built from their point of view. Um, and so you're allowed to say, you know what, I agree with this, I don't disagree with this, here's where their flaws in their study are. And in fact, that's where most research comes from, is those flaws and those weaknesses. And then novices often try to discuss studies as if they are all equal in quality, so that this study says this study says that. You don't have to do that. You can say some are better, some are methodologically superior research. So this research study is better than this research study, and I'm going to follow this idea because it was, prepared in a better fashion. And so just think about those things while you're developing your literature review and developing through this process. When you prepare to write, you kind of assess the quality of each article. You sample, look at the sample. How did they sample? What are their weaknesses in their samples? Measurement. Are all measures have some weaknesses? Was it a measure that had a weakness that was a limitation to the study? What did you notice about the studies you're reviewing? And then validity. Does it measure what it says it measures? You're looking at, that idea that if something is valid, then it should actually be related to the topic of which it's studying. And then can the results be generalized in a way that they suggest? If you're looking at research on children and they're talking about, second graders or third graders, then can you relate that to eighth graders if that's what your population is? And so how do you connect those things? Ultimately, you want to create a synthesis. You want to create a synthesis that shows the whole picture and how the pieces of the information fit together. You want to move from theme to theme. You want to cite relevant studies. So they give the example here in the PowerPoint, maternal depression and child health. Children's health, what factors are studied, what is left out? Maternal depression, how is it? How common is it? How is it measured? And then you look at the links between those two things: socioeconomic status, family instability, maternal health behaviors. So you look at, this is topic A, this is topic B, and here's how they come together. If you're lucky, you have literature on all three of these things that support your research study. And that kind of creates that synthesis of topic ideas. When I looked at the literature on sexual assault and emotions, there's a lot of research on emotions of children. So that's children's emotional response in a jury system, not necessarily relating to sexual assault, but just children's emotions within the jury system. Then I had victims' emotions and how that comes into play. And so when I looked at victims' emotions, I looked at the jury system and how it comes to play. I put those together and created a literature review that looks at children's perceptions of sexual assault victims within the criminal justice system. So it combines all three of these things together. You kind of want to avoid excessive descriptions of each study's methodology. You might want to keep a spreadsheet when reviewing the literature to ensure that you're saving all the information that you need. The reason you want to avoid extensive descriptions, if they want to know, they can go look it up, right? You can refer to it without detailing it, unless it's something that's really relevant to your study and you're using that piece of literature specifically to tie in with your methodology. So if you're using some new technique and there's a research topic, or there's a research study that studied that technique, then you may want to include the methodology behind that, because that is a large part of what your study is doing. This is an example of a spreadsheet that you might want to keep, just in terms of what the study title was, who the author are, what year was it published, all those things. So if you do this for every single article you review, you'll start to build up this database of yourself, and then you can quickly go through and put it all together. The hardest part of putting together a literature review is actually making sense out of multiple sources of information. So you got study A that says this, study B that says this, study C that says this, study D that contradicts all of it. How do you put that together? And that can be challenging. And so putting this together, the spreadsheet will help you organize that information, particularly when you do more detailed, literature reviews, or ones that involve a lot of articles. Try to keep notes of paraphrased points, quotations, together with author and page information. This is a huge mistake that students make. is they will get information from an article and then not know which article it came from, where it came from, which page it's on. Keep some notes. It helps when you're doing it. Even if it doesn't seem innocuous, put all that stuff in. If every time you paraphrase something, you put an author in note or saying this whole paragraph is coming from this information, then when you go back, you can write it in a way that you pull out some of those citations, but at least you know where that information has come from. So if you need to go back, you need to revise, you can. If you keep it in some sort of searchable format, then you can help regroup it by searching through it and organizing it that way. Use direct quotations sparingly. You should only be using it when the actual wording is especially well crafted or hard to restate. So, it's hard to reinvent the wheel sometimes, and that's kind of what paraphrasing is. But in a lot of ways, unless they're just perfect, try to paraphrase. I recommend only one quotation per paper, maybe a couple, just depending. Most of it should be coming from you. And then you might want to add a summary at the very end of your literature review. So you do an introduction which says, this is my study. This is what I'm looking at. This is why it's important. This is why it's relevant. This is the literature now that's going to follow that supports my hypotheses and supports my perspective of this. And then, you might organize by theme. So this is theme 1 and research relating to that. Theme 2 relating to that. Theme 3 and the literature relating to that. And then at the very end, you're going to summarize all that by saying, if you look at theme 1, theme 2, and theme 3, it brings you directly to my research idea. And really that's what ultimately what you're doing is you're creating a road directly to your research. That's what a literature review is. You are creating a road directly to your research topic. You want people to say, oh, I got here at the same place that you want me to be at. And so you're leading them through this literature. And that's what I kind of like to think of it as, is you're leading them through to a specific topic. Let's see, I've got a couple more here. Jumped ahead too far. So why do we use citations? When we are writing in academia, it's a conversation with the literature. So we are creating a one-sided conversation that gets added to everyone else's conversation. And you want other people to know where that conversation is coming from and where those researchers are and where those theorists are doing and what their basis is. That way, if they're interested in it, they can snowball it backwards and go backwards and figure out, what they're talking about and look at that literature. And citation is basically a way of acknowledging who has said what. And each article contributes to the discussion, right? So person A, person B, person C, researcher A, researcher B, all these things come together to create this conversational flow within science. And it gives credit to people for their ideas. And then in academic writing, all claims to facts need to be backed by evidence, either source data or either by source or by data. Why? Because science is open. That's it. Science is an open discussion. And so you want people to know where that information is coming from because you're not hiding it. Then if they want to go look at those research articles that you read and come to a different conclusion, then they're welcome to do so. One of the things I tell students when doing research is you are the researcher. If you decide I'm going to do A, then the worst that can happen is someone can disagree with you or might claim that there was a better method or claim that you made an error. That is their right to do it. It is your right to make that choice. And that is what I love about the research process. Citations have two parts. Citation within the writing. So this is, whenever you cite an author within the article, right? Actually, let me stop. We'll look at that here in a second. So citation within the writing, like Klippenstein et al. Let's see if it'll let me add that in there. Right. So it's that type of idea where you're like, Klippenstein and Schuler, 2012 said this. The citation at the end, let me bump that back to full screen. The citation at the end is, it's the full bibliographical information. It's the reference list, right? This is what we call, I don't know, I'm changing my notes as I talk, but this is your reference. Sorry, I have a mic in the way. It's hard to type. APA reference at the end of the paper, right? So your APA reference at the end of the paper is your bibliography. It's at the end. And so you cite within, and that depends on the style that you used. It's usually an author date, like I said, Klippenstein and Schuler, 2012. And then you include the full information so people can see that and they say, hey, what is this Klippenstein and Schuler article? And then they can go to the end of the article and say, hey, this is the entire bibliographical information on that research topic. Citation within writing can easily be connected to full source information by doing this. So you're not taking up a lot of space within your article. In fact, you should never refer to the entire reference within a literature review. You might talk Klippenstein and Schuler, but you never would say Klippenstein and Schuler in the Journal of Applied Social Psychology, blah, 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 blah. You wouldn't do that because it's eating up too much space. And then you usually have that APA reference at the end of the paper. A large part of what you're doing is paraphrasing. You're not copying word for word. You're paraphrasing and restating things in your own words. In most cases, paraphrasing is the preferred method. It is more versatile. You should really only use those quotations and reserve those for those well-crafted passages. It still requires citation. A lot of people think, well, if I paraphrase, I can not cite it. But if you're using someone else's ideas, then you should cite it. If you're referring to someone else's ideas in terms of your own concepts, then maybe not. But if you are referring specifically to their ideas, you should reference them. And so you want to make that link. It is not something that comes easily. Everybody struggles a little bit with citation. You either cite too much or not enough. And there's a fine balance between the two of it. And everyone's going to want different amounts. It doesn't hurt to cite more than less, and then learn from there to cut back if you need to. All of this is done to avoid plagiarism. And plagiarism, that is idea that when it's not attributed to its source, so when you don't give the due to the author of that information, you're plagiarizing that information, right? And that's true for paraphrasing and quotations. And also quotations should have more precise information about their location and their source, their page numbers. All of that should be included so that you are avoiding that process of plagiarism. All right, we got one more thing, and then I'm going to stop it. It's running a little bit longer than I wanted, but that'll be okay. So what are the styles? We follow a lot of different rules and grammars. The one that we're going to use in this class is APA style. I'm going to leave it at that. We will use an APA style guide as part of our write-up. So you can look through those things and kind of look at the different versions of those. But APA is the key one that we're going to use. There's are a lot of reference management tools. I don't think you'll need to use that in this class. But if you were writing a thesis or a dissertation, then it actually does become pretty helpful because there's just so many of them. And so you kind of have to, try to organize this stuff, and it can be difficult. My tip for you is to write down the reference whenever you start using that article. So it's there and you just put it in the reference guide. And then hey, I've used it, it's in there. And then you cite in text from that. So this is kind of the summary. Literature reviews provide a summary of findings and themes on the current topic under study. A good literature review should show knowledge of the topic and frame the importance of the current research. Databases matter for finding literatures, and there's a lot of techniques for doing that. You should structure the literature review using key statistics and important definitions of the main terms. Literature review is interrelated to the development of the research plan. It should be critical of the literature. It should scrutinize methods. It should scrutinize samples. It should scrutinize measures. It should look at the validity, and it should give better studies more coverage. So not every study is the same. You should organize key elements of studies in your review on a spreadsheet. You should cite. A citation acknowledges other scholars' work, and it is very, very important to avoid plagiarism. And then you use those study style guides to inform this information. All right, so I will get these loaded. I'm at about 20 minutes right now, which is a little bit longer than I want it, but this kind of covers this whole section. Before then, before class on Tuesday, if you're still listening, and you should be, please be prepared to discuss citations and references and some of this information, because I want to talk about this process, and come up with a question. Come up with a question that you have about the literature review. And so when I say we'll try to talk about those as we kind of go through on our discussion on Tuesday. All right, thank you very much, and hopefully the sound is better, the video is better, and we'll kind of move from there. Have a great rest of your day.